There are moments in life that feel almost sacred, and a wedding day is one of them. It's the day promises are spoken out loud, dreams of the future take shape, and love feels untouchable. Families gather, hearts are full, and everything seems destined for happiness. But sometimes, even the most beautiful celebrations take a devastating turn. Not with cheers or a final kiss, but with silence and loss. Some never make it to the aisle, their lives ending just hours before the ceremony begins. Others collapse moments after exchanging rings. Some spend their final breaths in a hospital bed, still wrapped in the dress meant for their happiest day. They leave this world at the very moment a new chapter was supposed to begin, turning what should have been a perfect memory into something haunting and unforgettable. The 11 stories you're about to hear reveal just how thin and terrifying the line can be between joy and sorrow, love and tragedy, new beginnings and heartbreaking endings. Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard. A wedding day that turned into a funeral. The powerful founding voice of the Supremes, a woman whose sound helped define Motown's golden era, stood on the edge of what she hoped would be a fresh start. For years, her voice had shaken the charts and filled stages with life. But behind the glittering lights and roaring applause was a story marked by heartbreak, struggle, and relentless storms. By late 1975, the chaos finally seemed to quiet. After a life scarred by personal battles and painful setbacks, Florence found comfort again with Thomas Chapman, the man who had walked beside her through years of love, separation, reconciliation, and the bond they shared through their 3 daughters. This time, they weren't revisiting old wounds. They were planning a new beginning, a small, intimate wedding in Detroit, surrounded by family, where Florence hoped to leave the turbulence behind and step into stability and peace. The first days of February 1976 moved quickly. Every detail for the ceremony was carefully prepared in the yard of her home. Florence seemed lighter, smiling more, speaking about the future with a warmth that hadn't been seen in years. Her mother lovingly hand-beaded the wedding dress, a symbol of hope stitched with patience and care. Friends and family noticed something rare in her eyes, genuine excitement, a fragile joy that had survived years of industry pressure and personal pain. On the morning of the ceremony, the house felt alive with quiet celebration. Guests arrived early, ready for a simple, heartfelt moment. Time moved quickly for everyone else, but for Florence, every second stretched with anticipation. Alone in her room, she prepared to step into her dress, standing on the threshold between her past struggles and the promise of a calmer future. No one sensed danger. No one imagined the cruel twist waiting just hours away. Then tragedy struck without warning. Florence suddenly collapsed while preparing for the ceremony, her body falling into the gown meant for a new beginning. Joy turned instantly into panic. A coronary thrombosis triggered a massive heart attack, shattering every plan in a single moment. Family members rushed her to Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital, the familiar streets of Detroit suddenly feeling endless and unreal. Doctors fought desperately, racing against something they could not see or stop. Hours later, the battle was lost. Florence Ballard died at just 32 years old. There was no walk down the aisle, no exchange of rings, no wedding music filling the air. The day meant to mark a new chapter became a heartbreaking farewell. The Detroit home that had been filled with hope fell into heavy silence, where congratulations were replaced by quiet tears and stunned disbelief. Her death carried a painful irony. A woman who had endured both glory and devastating hardship reached for happiness one last time, only for it to slip away in an instant. Perhaps years of pressure, emotional wounds, and the heavy cost of constantly standing strong had quietly worn her down. Perhaps the stress of that hopeful day became the final weight her heart could not bear. Florence Ballard left this world before her dream of peace could truly begin, leaving behind a legacy of music, a story of resilience, and an ache that lingered in the hearts of those who loved her. Frankie Lyman. Frankie Lyman. A boy who once sang like pure sunshine, watching his dream of adulthood shatter just hours before his wedding day. The teenage music prodigy, once the electrifying voice behind Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, rose fast, creating hits that helped ignite America's early teen pop explosion. He wasn't just a star, He was a symbol of youthful innocence and unstoppable promise. But fame arrived too early, and the weight behind the spotlight grew heavier than anyone realized. Addiction crept in. Legal troubles followed. And when puberty changed his voice, the industry that once celebrated him slowly turned away, leaving Frankie to face a painful identity crisis in public view. By 1967, a gentle glimmer of hope appeared when Frankie met Amira Eagle, a quiet, compassionate private school teacher who offered him something he had rarely known: stability. Their love grew quickly yet privately, far from flashing cameras and noisy headlines. Friends began noticing a change. Frankie talked about responsibility, about growing up, about shedding the reckless boy image and stepping into manhood. Late that year, they decided to marry in New York. A simple ceremony, not glamorous, but deeply meaningful. For Frankie, it symbolized redemption, a chance to leave behind the scars of the past and finally build a future. The early weeks of 1968 carried both excitement and nerves. Wedding plans filled every spare moment while Frankie rushed to complete recording commitments, determined to start married life with a clean slate. February 27, 1968, just one day before the ceremony, he stayed at his grandmother's Harlem home, a place he considered safe and grounding. It was meant to be a quiet final night before everything changed. But beneath the calm, old struggles quietly resurfaced. Alone with racing thoughts, Frankie stepped into the bathroom close to midnight, overwhelmed by anxiety about the future, questioning whether he was strong enough to be a husband, a provider, a man who could truly change. In a moment of weakness, he reached for a dangerous escape. No one in the house noticed anything unusual at first. Only when the bathroom door stayed locked and repeated calls went unanswered did fear set in. The silence turned unbearable. When the door was finally forced open, Frankie was found collapsed beside the bathtub, motionless. Heroin, the demon he had fought for years, had returned in the cruelest way. One relapse destroyed every hope he had been building. Frankie Lyman died at just 25 years old, only hours away from walking down the aisle into a new life. What was meant to be a day of celebration instantly became a scene of heartbreak. The wedding dress, the reception tables, the carefully prepared gifts, every detail turned into painful reminders of what would never happen. New York woke up the next morning not to wedding bells, but to devastating headlines. Amira lost the man she believed was finally ready for change. His family was left in shock. Fans around the world struggled to understand how the boy who once embodied joy and innocence could meet such a tragic end. The pressure of growing up in the spotlight, the fear of an uncertain future, the invisible wounds left by early fame, all collided in one fragile moment. If Frankie had lived, maybe he would have found peace, rebuilt his career, or raised a small, loving family. Maybe his voice would have continued to echo on stages around the world. But maybe remains only a shadow of possibility. The heartbreaking truth is that just as his life seemed ready to turn toward light, everything suddenly fell into darkness. Jimi Hendrix, the guitar genius who reshaped rock music, stopped breathing just days before he was meant to say, "I do." A wedding promise faded into silence on a fateful night. Hendrix wasn't just a psychedelic rock icon. He revolutionized how the world heard and felt the electric guitar, leaving a permanent imprint on music history. After years trapped in the relentless whirlwind of stages, studios, and sleepless tours, his life seemed to be slowing down. By 1969, he had found comfort with Monika Danman, a quiet and gentle German figure skater and painter. Together they shared long European journeys and soft London nights after the spotlight faded. In the middle of exhausting fame and lonely hotel rooms, the promise of marriage felt like an anchor. A small, intimate wedding in Germany planned for September 19, 1970. When Hendrix returned to London in mid-September after touring, friends noticed a change. He seemed calmer, more reflective, quietly talking about stepping back and rebuilding his personal life. For the first time in years, London wasn't just another stop. It felt like a pause before a new beginning. Marriage, for him, wasn't only love. It was a symbol of growth, a chance to escape the self-destructive chaos that had long surrounded him. On the evening of September 17th, inside a quiet room at the Samarkand Hotel, The outside world disappeared behind a closed door. Monica prepared dinner. Candlelight flickered. Gentle conversations stretched late into the night. A peaceful moment before the life they planned to start together. Everything seemed perfectly calm, like a soft landing after years of storms. But no one imagined that sleep would steal the future waiting for him. After dinner and wine, Hendrix took barbiturates, a common sedative among artists at the time, but the dose went dangerously beyond control. Deep unconsciousness followed. His breathing grew irregular, and when his body's natural reflexes failed, vomit blocked his airway. Monica slept beside him, unaware of the silent struggle unfolding. By morning, Hendrix lay motionless. Emergency help was called immediately, but time had already slipped away. Jimi Hendrix died at just 27 years old, one day before the wedding meant to mark his new beginning. The dream of vows ended in silence. News spread across the world with heartbreaking speed. Fans didn't just lose a musical legend, they lost a man trying to transform his life. The wedding planned in Germany vanished from the calendar, replaced instead by a private funeral attended only by close family. In Hendrix's notebook, plans for the future became unfinished thoughts frozen in time. Years of relentless creative pressure, deep exhaustion, and dangerous habits formed during his wild rise all converged in one tragic moment, just as he reached for the stability he had long been searching for. Heavy D. Wedding bells turned into funeral silence. A joyful celebration became unimaginable loss when the beloved rapper collapsed from a blood clot after a long flight. Heavy D, born Dwight Arrington Myers, was the vibrant heart of New Jack Swing, the charismatic frontman of Heavy D and the Boys, and a force who helped bring positivity and explosive energy into mainstream hip-hop. After decades under bright stage lights and relentless touring, he had reached a season of life where peace and family meant more than fame. For more than 10 years, he shared a deep bond with Antonia LaFaso, a talented, passionate chef whose strength balanced his larger-than-life presence. Together they built a stable, loving world, especially after welcoming their daughter, Z, in 2000. She became the center of their universe and the reason they dreamed of making their love official. They chose patience, growing together for a decade before planning a meaningful wedding, a day they imagined their daughter proudly walking beside her mother, holding a bouquet filled with hope. It was a beautiful vision, and it finally came within reach. A decade later, the dream was real. A simple but heartfelt wedding in Los Angeles was scheduled for late 2011, just after Heavy D wrapped up touring. The final months felt light and promising, work was smooth, his health seemed stable, and conversations about their future were filled with confidence. He traveled often between cities, eventually flying to London for one last long trip before beginning a quieter chapter of life. To him, it wasn't another exhausting performance schedule. It was the final step before settling into peace. November 8, 2011 arrived faster than anyone expected, the very day he was meant to walk down the aisle. That morning in Beverly Hills felt completely ordinary. Heavy D had just returned from London after an overnight flight. His body was tired from travel, but nothing felt alarming. Dressed sharply, spirits high, he stepped outside his home ready to head to the ceremony, when tragedy struck without warning. Heavy D suddenly collapsed at his front door. There were no signs, no time to prepare. His body was overwhelmed by a massive pulmonary embolism caused by deep vein thrombosis, blood clots that had formed during prolonged sitting on the long flight. Blood flow was blocked, breathing became impossible, and within minutes his body spiraled out of control. Neighbors rushed to help as panic spread. Emergency responders transported him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in critical condition. Every second became a desperate fight. Doctors worked urgently, but his body could not recover. Meanwhile, loved ones waited at the wedding venue, unaware that hope was fading. Instead of vows and celebration, heartbreaking news arrived. Heavy D passed away on the very day he was meant to say, "I do." Antonia lost the partner she had built a life with for over a decade. Their daughter lost her strongest protector. Decorations meant for joy became painful reminders of a future that would never unfold. His passing left the world stunned by cruel irony, a man overflowing with life and stage energy, fresh off a successful tour and filled with dreams of marriage, gone because of a hidden complication after what seemed like an ordinary flight. Heavy D's legacy remains a powerful reminder of both the fragility of life and the lasting impact of love, music, and positivity he shared with millions. David Ruffin. David Ruffin. The legendary voice of the Temptations fell silent on the very day he was meant to say, "I do," as fragile happiness was shattered by a deadly addiction. With his rich, emotional baritone, Ruffin helped define the golden age of soul and carved his name deep into pop music history. By 1989, he had found love with Diane Showers in Philadelphia. Their relationship lasted more than 2 years, quiet, private, and grounded. They didn't chase headlines or flaunt their joy, but their bond was strong enough to build dreams of a shared future. Long tours and lonely days apart only made their reunion sweeter, slowly shaping a warm, family-like connection. Their small summer wedding in 1991 was meant to be a turning point, a hopeful closing chapter to a life filled with storms. In early 1991, David returned from a European tour in high spirits. Crowds still welcomed him with deep respect, filling venues with thunderous applause. Back home in Philadelphia, the air was alive with excitement and anticipation. June 1, 1991 arrived wrapped in joy. The morning felt brighter than usual. David woke up refreshed after months of hard work. His wedding suit, carefully embroidered by Diane herself, waited nearby. Friends and family began gathering, smiling, eager for his grand entrance. No one sensed danger. No one imagined tragedy was already creeping closer. Hoping to keep his energy high for a full day of celebration and non-stop partying, David used cocaine shortly before getting dressed. But in a moment of overexcitement, he took more than his body could handle. The powerful stimulant overwhelmed a heart already strained by years of pressure. His heartbeat spiraled out of control and suddenly stopped, leaving no time for rescue. David Ruffin collapsed in his bedroom. Panic spread when his groomsmen found him unconscious. Emergency services rushed him to the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, where doctors fought desperately to save him, but his body never responded. He passed away at 50 years old, leaving an irreplaceable void on a day meant to begin a new chapter of happiness. Instead of walking down the aisle in his elegant suit, he left behind heartbreak, and that same suit remains a treasured memory Diane Showers still holds onto today. Phyllis Hyman. A voice carved from deep soul, powerful, aching, unforgettable, silence just as a new chapter was about to begin. For decades, Phyllis captivated audiences with her rich soprano and raw, emotional storytelling, leaving an indelible mark on R&B and soul music. Yet behind the spotlight lived a woman fighting quiet battles, navigating years of pressure, loneliness, and mental illness while still giving her heart to the stage. After many unstable years under the glare of fame, Phyllis finally found comfort in a gentle man who wasn't wealthy or famous, just steady, patient, and willing to stand beside her through every storm. Their relationship began in 1990 and lasted 5 meaningful years, long enough for Phyllis to believe in something real and lasting. When she wrote music, he would make tea and sit beside her as they dreamed about building a simple, honest life together. By the summer of 1995, they had planned a modest but deeply meaningful wedding in New York. The days leading up to the ceremony were filled with excitement and quiet tension. True to her spirit, Phyllis scheduled a performance at the legendary Apollo Theater on the very day of her wedding. To her, music and life were inseparable. Performing that night symbolized survival, healing, and the promise of a new beginning. June 30, 1995 arrived with the familiar rush of New York City. That morning seemed ordinary. Inside her West 56th Street apartment, her wedding dress and stage outfit were ready, her schedule carefully arranged. But shortly after waking, the bipolar disorder she had carried for years surged unexpectedly. Overwhelmed by emotional exhaustion, she made a tragic decision, mixing antidepressants with alcohol. The combination quickly overwhelmed her already fragile body. In the quiet of her apartment, a devastating tragedy unfolded unnoticed. By the time she was discovered, it was too late. Doctors could do nothing. Phyllis Hyman died at just 45 years old, on the very day meant to be the happiest of her life. The news spread quickly, leaving family, friends, and fans in deep shock. The Apollo performance never happened, becoming a painful symbol of what was lost. And behind it all was an even quieter heartbreak, the wedding that never came to be. Years of relentless career pressure, ongoing struggles with mental health, and the fear of losing stability just as happiness felt within reach may have weighed heavily on her spirit. In the end, Phyllis never walked down the aisle, never stood on the Apollo stage that night, and never lived the peaceful life she had longed for. But her voice, filled with truth, vulnerability, and soul, continues to echo long after the silence she left behind. Gangsta Boo. Gangsta Boo. A wedding day that turned into a farewell. A pioneering female rapper whose life was cut short by a tragic overdose at the very start of a new year. Gangsta Boo, born Lola Chantrell Mitchell, was the groundbreaking female voice of 3-6 Mafia, a fearless force who helped shape the raw, unapologetic sound of Southern hip-hop and left a permanent mark on American rap history. In her later years, she stepped away from the chaos of constant fame, choosing a quieter life with her longtime partner, Emmett Flores. Together since 2014, they had weathered everything: late nights in studios, exhausting tours, and even the emotional trials of marriage boot camp, where they learned to repair what was broken and rebuild their bond. The noise of celebrity faded, replaced by a calmer vision of the future. That future was supposed to begin in Memphis, the city that raised her, with a small, intimate wedding surrounded by family and close friends. In late 2022, her mother's home filled with the warmth of celebration. A wedding dress shimmered with hundreds of hand-beaded stones. Music was carefully curated, lively enough to reflect her spirit, yet soft enough to embrace family love. Friends noticed a change in her. The fierce, rebellious rapper who once roared across stages had grown gentler, smiling more often, speaking about tomorrow with a quiet, hopeful tone. January 1st, 2023, the day she chose to start fresh. A new year, a new chapter, a new life as a wife. New Year's Eve at her mother's house was filled with laughter, dancing, and hugs that lingered a little longer than usual. No one imagined it would be the last night they would see her smile. The next morning, the house still carried echoes of celebration. Music she had personally selected played softly while loved ones waited for the bride. Minutes stretched into hours. The wedding dress hung untouched. By 10 a.m., she was found unconscious in her bedroom. An accidental overdose, a deadly mix of fentanyl, cocaine, and alcohol, shattered what was meant to be a day of joy. News spread through Memphis faster than any beat she ever rapped over. The hip-hop world stood stunned. Fans struggled to accept the image of a bride who would never walk down the aisle, her carefully chosen music now echoing like a goodbye instead of a beginning. Perhaps the shadows of the past never fully faded. Even as she reached for a more peaceful life, old wounds lingered beneath the surface. One night of celebration pushed too far, one fragile moment, was enough to end every dream she had been building. Gangsta Boo passed away at 43 on the very day she planned to start a new life. And the songs she prepared for a wedding became the soundtrack to her final farewell. C.J. Harris. C.J. Harris. A wedding day that turned into an eternal goodbye. The beloved American Idol Season 13 R&B voice, known for his warm, heartfelt performances, suddenly collapsed from a devastating heart attack. With his soulful tone and humble presence, CJ never chased flash or fame, yet he touched listeners deeply through honest, everyday music that felt real and personal. In early 2023, at his home in the small town of Jasper, Alabama, everything was ready for one of the most meaningful days of his life. After years of grinding through local stages, small bars, and intimate shows filled with passion rather than spotlight, CJ was finally preparing to step into a new chapter. A promising road in music stretched ahead, and a quiet, loving wedding was only days away. It was the stable, peaceful life he had dreamed about ever since the bright lights of American Idol faded. CJ kept his relationship mostly private, but those close to him knew the bond was strong. His partner had stood by him through the hardest years, when TV fame disappeared and his name no longer filled headlines. That unwavering loyalty made their mid-January 2023 wedding feel sacred. No grand ballroom, no luxury spectacle, just a simple ceremony in Jasper, surrounded by family and close friends ready to witness one of life's purest joys. January 15, 2023 arrived quickly. The morning carried a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. At home, CJ prepared quietly, imagining the moment he would walk down the aisle toward the woman who had walked through every struggle with him. Only a few hours remained before a new life would begin. Then, without warning, intense chest pain struck. His body suddenly betrayed him. He collapsed while adjusting his suit, on the very day he was meant to leave his home smiling toward forever. Panic filled the room as loved ones called 911. An ambulance rushed through the cold winter morning, sirens cutting through the silence while carefully planned dreams were left behind. CJ was taken to Walker Baptist Medical Center in critical condition. Doctors fought desperately to revive his fading heartbeat, but the miracle everyone prayed for never came. A heart attack took CJ Harris's life at just 31 years old. The date meant to mark a lifetime of happiness became a day of unimaginable loss. No aisle walk. No exchanged rings. No bright future carried forward. That winter felt colder than ever as a wedding turned into a farewell. Perhaps years of silent pressure after the competition and the instability of a struggling music career placed invisible strain on a young man who always pushed himself forward. CJ's heart had carried more than anyone realized, and it reached its limit on the very day he was ready to begin again. David Jolicoeur, Trugoy the Dove, gone too soon, just as life seemed to be settling into peace. A founding voice of De La Soul, he wasn't just a rapper, he was the warm, witty soul of alternative hip-hop, known for sharp lyricism, humor, and a legacy that quietly reshaped the culture. In early 2023, after years of battling serious health challenges and riding the unpredictable waves of music and life, Trugoy appeared to be entering a calmer chapter. He and his longtime partner were preparing for a small, private wedding in New York. No spotlight, no extravagance, just a deeply personal celebration of a bond built through years of struggle and love. The ceremony was set for mid-February, arriving at the same moment De La Soul was receiving a powerful resurgence of attention as their classic albums were finally reissued, giving overdue recognition to their influence. The days leading up to the wedding felt peaceful and intimate. Trugoy spent most of his time resting at home after completing recent recordings. The house was unusually quiet, no hectic flights, no exhausting shows, just a man slowly reorganizing his life and pouring his energy into a new beginning. Friends and family noticed a rare calmness in his face, a gentle serenity that hadn't been seen in years after long health complications. By February 12th, just one day before the wedding, everything was ready, travel plans confirmed, ceremony details carefully set. Everyone felt hopeful. Trugoy seemed upbeat, stronger than he had in a long time, his resilience shining after years of illness. Yet beneath that calm exterior, his heart carried the silent weight of long-term medical struggles. That evening passed like any other, no obvious warning signs, nothing alarming, only a longer silence than usual that quietly raised concern. When his partner found him unresponsive in the bathroom, emergency services were called within minutes, but despite every effort, nothing could bring him back. Trugoy passed away from congestive heart failure, a condition he had fought for years, cruelly taking him just one day before he was meant to walk down the aisle. The news spread quickly, leaving the hip-hop world in shock. De La Soul, the groundbreaking group he helped build, lost an irreplaceable spirit, and a joyful wedding transformed into a heartbreaking farewell. As people reflected on his final days, they remembered the long battle with illness, the pressure of preserving a musical legacy, and the emotional weight of seeing his work finally recognized again. Perhaps the wedding gave him the strength to keep pushing forward, holding on until he could stand at the altar with hope and love in his heart, but in the end, his body gave out at the very moment he had been waiting for most. Robbie Pardlow. A wedding anniversary meant to celebrate 2 decades of love instead became a heartbreaking farewell. The unforgettable voice of City High, the man behind the early 2000s smash hit, What Would You Do?, left a lasting mark on R&B and hip-hop with songs that reflected real life and touched millions of hearts. By the summer of 2025, far from the spotlight, Robbie had built a quiet, meaningful life in Willingboro, New Jersey with his wife Enukika and their two sons, Lyric and Court Andrew. Their home was private, grounded, and filled with simple family moments rather than flashing cameras. After years of personal struggles, Enukika had helped him heal and rediscover purpose beyond fame. No more packed tours, just school runs, family dinners, and the steady rhythm of being a husband and father. That year marked their 20th wedding anniversary, and they planned an intimate celebration to honor the journey they had survived together. July 17th arrived with warmth and anticipation. Close friends were invited, the house carefully decorated, tables prepared with love instead of luxury, and laughter expected to echo louder than any formal speeches. In the days leading up to the party, Robbie seemed genuinely happy, though subtle signs of fatigue had quietly lingered. That morning felt peaceful as he helped his wife and children prepare for the evening. Nothing appeared alarming on the surface, yet inside his body, long-standing cardiovascular issues were reaching a breaking point, years of stress and overlooked health warnings slowly taking their toll. By 5 p.m., guests began arriving. Enukika welcomed everyone while final touches were made. But by 6 o'clock, Robbie still hadn't come out of the bedroom. Concern grew. At her request, their oldest son went to check on him and found his father motionless on the bed. Joy turned instantly into panic. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but despite every effort, Robbie Pardlow passed away at just 46 years old due to cardiovascular complications. In a home decorated for celebration, silence replaced music and congratulations. The shock rippled through family, friends, and fans who believed he still had so much time ahead. Two young sons faced an unimaginable loss on a day meant for happiness. Robbie had worked hard to build a stable, loving life for his family and to make that anniversary perfect, but the quiet health warnings were easy to ignore until it was too late, turning a moment of joy into an unspeakable tragedy. Prince. A wedding at Paisley Park, planned in silence, canceled by fate at the very last moment. The world lost a musical genius, and with him vanished a deeply personal dream of family and new beginnings. Prince wasn't just an icon. He was a boundary breaker, a fearless creator who built an entire universe of sound, beyond pop, beyond rock, beyond funk. Yet behind the legend was a man quietly preparing for one of the most intimate chapters of his life. In April 2016, after decades under relentless spotlight and pressure, Prince turned inward. Few people knew he was planning a simple, private wedding at Paisley Park, the sanctuary where his creativity was born and where he felt most alive. The assistant who had stood beside him for years in the studio, listening to unfinished melodies and late-night ideas, had become the person he trusted to build a home and future with. Those final days were calm and almost sacred. No flashing cameras. No crowded guest lists. Just quiet rooms filled with music and hope. Despite his physical exhaustion, Prince worked tirelessly to finish his last recordings, eager to leave work behind and step fully into married life. He promised himself a honeymoon free from deadlines and expectations. On the morning of April 21, 2016, Paisley Park stood ready for a noon ceremony. Everything was prepared. Inside his familiar space, Prince was getting ready for what should have been a new beginning. No one imagined it would become his final morning there. For years, Prince had endured intense physical pain, relying on medication to cope. Tragically, a counterfeit Vicodin pill laced with fentanyl would change everything. Shortly after taking it, he entered an elevator and collapsed. Within minutes, he was found unconscious and not breathing. Emergency services rushed to save him, but it was too late. At just 57 years old, Prince was gone, leaving Paisley Park silent and the music world shattered. Fans around the globe struggled to understand how such strength and brilliance could end so suddenly. Perhaps he believed he could manage the pain on his own, that he was still in control. But one devastating mistake erased a lifetime still filled with dreams. April 21st should have marked the beginning of a new chapter: love, family, peace. Instead, It became the day Paisley Park lost its heart and music lost one of its greatest visionaries. Glory, love, hope, gone in a single moment. How does this story make you feel? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more powerful stories revealing the hidden lives behind fame, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support keeps these untold stories alive.